In October 1974, as food prices increased beyond the reach of the majority of Americans and a harsh winter was predicted in Wyoming, 41-year-old Carl Higdon got ready to go hunting and explore the surrounding forests and wilderness in an effort to find a significant portion of his family's meat supply for the upcoming few months. Having done so multiple times previously, he traveled out once more with plenty of room left in the freezer, which he needed to feed his wife and 4 kids in addition to himself. But on this specific hunting expedition, events would take an odd and strange turn. One of the most intriguing accounts ever recorded, Higdon's provides tangible proof that at the very least, a bizarre experience took place. Moreover, it is an additional instance that provides information obtained in seemingly unrelated interactions over time and space. In fact, if Carl Higdon's story holds any water at all, and all signs point to the event being real, it may provide some light on the reasons behind the persistence and existence of the UFO phenomenon. Carl Higdon had no real intention of going hunting on October 25th. Not at first, however. Before the afternoon shift, he got a call from one of his crew members while he was getting ready for work as usual. Due to his illness, he was unable to work. Higdon also took the day off, claiming that he wouldn't be able to accomplish anything without his ill crew member. Having spare time in the afternoon, he made the decision to go elk hunting in the rural areas of Wyoming. He would load up his truck in the afternoon and head out to McCarthy Canyon and Carbon County. He did, however, come across several other hunters who seemed to be having car problems while traveling. After stopping to help the two, he struck up a conversation with them. They would tell him about a location deep into the Medicine Bow National Forest where the hunting was much better, and there were a lot more elk. Though it was a far-off location with little known history, the hunters who were stuck there were glad to tell Higdon about it because of his generosity. After starting their car, he headed off once more. But he had a different plan this time. From now on, he would go to the Medicine Bow National Forest. He reasoned that it wasn't too far off. He was approximately 40 kilometers away from Rawlings, his hometown. It was almost 4 p.m. by the time he reached his location in the late afternoon. The light was still there, but it was about to fade. As Higdon was getting ready for hunting after getting out of his truck, he noticed his friend Gary Eaton, who was also a hunter. After a few minutes of conversation, Gary told him he was going higher than Higdon into the forest, but he might scare down some elk for him. Higdon proceeded to the place the stranded hunters had told him about, while his comrade continued on. While doing so, he discovered a hidden space behind a hill. Shortly after coming into this space, he noticed an abrupt flurry of movement out of the corner of his eye. His attention was drawn to a small herd of elk nearby. There were 5 elk in all, and he was just above them. He raised his hunting rifle, aimed it at one of the animals, and pulled the trigger. Not only did the gun's kickback not occur, but there was also absolutely no sound. Higdon claims to have seen the bullet exit the barrel and go through the air so slowly that it floated like a butterfly as he simultaneously had the end of the gun in his sights. At some point, it would fall to the ground some 50 feet ahead of him. All of a sudden, he noticed a painful silence surrounding him. There was no sound coming from anything or anywhere. Higdon detected the static electricity sensation that you typically get before a powerful thunderstorm. He awoke somewhat and moved forward to pick up the dropped 7mm bullet. He saw that the bullet had lost its lead component and that the bullet itself, or at least its housing, had been significantly deformed. Somewhere nearby, a twig broke suddenly. Higdon would turn and see the figure in front of him right away. Convinced it was another hunter, he swiftly brought his pistol down. But when the unusual figure stepped out of the tree shadows, he became aware that something was terribly wrong. The figure wasn't human, yet it was unquestionably male and humanoid. Higdon would subsequently recollect that the figure had very small eyes, no eyebrows, and no detectable ears. His hair was coarse, like straw growing out of his head, he further recalled. Its face was slitted, revealing 3 enormous teeth that resembled those of a human. The things that resembled antennas on either side of its forehead were possibly the most strange. No chin was apparent, Higdon would continue. His throat and face seemed to merge seamlessly. There was no jawbone in him. The unknown male entity, according to him, was about 6 feet tall and dressed in a tight-fitting black one-piece suit that was similar to a wetsuit scuba divers wear. There were crisscrossed harnesses on the breast. Additionally, the figure wore a metallic belt that had a 6-pointed yellow star in place of the buckle. Higdon was already nervous and on the verge of panic, and he had to use all of his strength to keep from losing his composure when he saw the creature's right arm. A drill-like instrument was fused or blended onto the wrist in place of the hand. Upon examining the left arm, he saw that the blunt limb was completely devoid of everything. The beast advanced, coming straight at Higdon. He was prepared for the worst, so it was startling when the monster inquired, "How are you doing?" in a matter-of-fact manner. The odd thing asked Higdon whether he was hungry, which only served to throw him further off guard, since he was already finding it difficult to remain composed and comprehend what was happening. Prior to him having a chance to respond, a transparent parcel materialized in his direction, as though guided by the unfamiliar guest. Higdon grabbed it. 4 tablets were inside the package, which resembled cellophane when he opened it. Higdon was informed by the monster that he should take one immediately, since it would last him 4 days. Higdon picked up one of the pills, put it in his mouth, and took it without asking any questions. And with that, he put the package in his pocket. Auso 1, the monster explained, was his name. Higdon noticed a transparent cube-shaped object on the ground behind the man as he proceeded. He would put its height and width at about 5 feet and its height at about 7 feet. Higdon inexplicably discerned that this was the weird figure's ship, despite not being told so. The creature inquired, "Do you want to come along?" as if reading his mind. He must have indicated as much even if he didn't say yes out loud. He was inside the cube the next thing he knew. Auso 1 was beside him. Higdon stared about in amazement, trying to figure out how the 2 of them could fit into such a small space, but a constant panic was rising beneath the surface. His own recollections and perceptions were fuzzy when he realized the 5 elk were in the cube with them. However, he would remember that they were motionless, paralyzed. That's when he noticed he was sitting on a chair with his arms tightly restrained by bands. He sensed the UFO raising itself off the ground. He saw another of the creatures come into the space as well. It came over to him and fitted an odd, helmet-shaped thing over his head. Higdon could see the planet-shaped object beneath him, which looked like a basketball, as the underside of the craft was visible. Though it wasn't Earth or any other planet he was aware of, it was still a planet. They were going to enter this otherworldly place, and while Higdon's memories of it are vague at best, what he does remember is intriguing. The image that dominated his thoughts the most was of a massive tower that dwarfed all around it. All around this tower were revolving patterns of multicolored lights, he would remember. Higdon was unable to look at the lights since they were so bright. The figures seemed indifferent to their guest's pain as they brought the ship to a stop at the foot of the tower. Through the translucent walls of the craft, Higdon was able to observe the alien world. The sight of multiple humans interacting with one another like they would on Earth astounded him at that moment. He reported that there were 2 little girls, one in her early teens and the other around 11, a teenage couple about 18, and an elderly male in his 60s. His host came up to him again as he was watching this spectacle outside the ship. He stated that they were on a planet that was 163,000 light miles away from Earth. He answered, "The passage of time is different for them," when Higdon asked if the creature had meant light years. Also, one gestured for them to leave. They entered an elevator with him and arrived at a room with a platform in the middle. Someone told him to get up on the platform. He realized as he moved that he was floating instead of walking, though he was unsure of how. As soon as they stepped upon the elevated platform, a glassy shield emerged from the wall. It appeared to be doing some sort of scan on Higdon when it stopped in front of him. The shield withdrew from him and retreated back into the wall after around 5 minutes. Then, his host gave him the very direct news that he didn't suit their purpose and that they would be returning him to Earth, where they had originally discovered him. This aspect is quite important since, less than 10 years later, an elderly man in England by the name of Alfred Berthoud would get nearly the same response to a similar investigation into a landed UFO. Berthoud is unlikely to have known about Higdon's interaction and may even support Higdon's theory that a breeding program was the purpose. He had no idea how he got back into the cube, but before he knew it, he was there. He did remember Also 1 admiring his primitive weapon before returning the gun to him, though. Strangely enough, he also seems to recall his host telling him that their home planet's oceans were devoid of fish, which was one of the things their people enjoyed most about Earth. The monster reclaimed the tablets, realizing that Higdon would no longer require them as they prepared to take flight. This concluded his recollection of the celestial meeting prior to his return to Earth. Higdon didn't ask how his truck had apparently been moved several miles from where he had parked it to the location where he saw the humanoid monster because he was disoriented and on the edge of going insane. He became aware that he was floating somewhat above the Earth when the thing said, "We'll see you." He was standing on the precipice of a rocky cliff when he realized that the craft had vanished. It was only a 10-foot drop, but yet he was unprepared. Upon landing on the lower surface, he would suffer severe damage. It's possible that he also got a concussion from the fall because his next memory is of himself staggering along a dirt road, unable to recall where he was or what had happened. Eventually, he located his truck, but he didn't recognize it as his truck because of his damaged memory. All he was doing was taking cover with it. He swiftly grabbed up the CB radio and called for assistance when he heard someone speaking. He wouldn't know where he was, but he would remember seeing a sign indicating that he was in the North Boundary National Forest. Before midnight, a search party would eventually find him. When they finally did, they couldn't figure out how he'd driven the vehicle there. Moreover, despite the muddy ground, there were no vehicle traces in the area. To further complicate the situation, the search party would come across odd green, red, and white flashing lights in the sky above as they were looking for Higdon. Higdon's spouse had participated in the search, but Higdon didn't initially recognize her. Finally responding to the search party, he let out a frantically screamed, "They took my elk!" Eventually, Higdon and his spouse got into a cop car and were driven to the closest hospital. After much effort, the other members of the search team succeeded in pulling his truck from its enigmatic place. In addition to the wounds from the fall, his bloodshot eyes would be noticed by the medical professionals. However, more experiments would yield more interesting findings. For instance, his blood seemed to be more vitamin and nutrient-rich than that of the normal person. Stranger still, the tuberculosis scarring on his lungs had apparently vanished. In summary, he's now in A1 super condition, according to Dr. Tongo, who performed his examination. It is difficult to believe that this change has nothing to do with the interaction. Higdon didn't fully remember the meeting until the next day. The police will report the incident to the media with his permission. In turn, this would draw researchers and enthusiasts in the UFO community to Higdon in order to learn about the mind-bending occurrences. Leo Sprinkle was interested in Higdon's case because he was skilled at employing hypnotic regression to retrieve memories of these kinds of experiences. While Higdon already knew a great deal about what had happened, the sessions in early November 1974 did manage to unearth a few more intriguing details about the occurrence, and perhaps provides us with an explanation for why these visits are taking place. Higdon claims that the visits to Earth are basically food-gathering expeditions. There are a lot of fish and animals on Earth that are unique to our planet. For breeding purposes, these animals travel in groups to their homeworld, in this case, the elk. He reiterated that visitors from Earth arrive on this extraterrestrial planet for identical purposes, but nothing else about the specifics or nuances of the program sprang to mind. Higdon acknowledged, nevertheless, that he thought his previous vasectomy was the reason he did not suit their purpose. According to Sprinkle's assessment, Higdon is reporting sincerely the events he experienced, incidentally. Apart from the strangely twisted bullet he managed to keep, there is no way to account for the disappearance of the lung scars listed on his medical file. And then there is the truck's impossibly remote location, for which the search team was never able to provide an explanation for how it got there. In 1978, after a few years had passed, Higdon took a polygraph exam. The assessment said that something utterly fantastic did happen in this man's life, and he passed it without a doubt. The test unequivocally establishes this. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.